Today's show is devoted to the glorious onion. Did you know that in addition to serving as food, onions were prescribed to alleviate headaches, snake bites, and hair loss? They were even used as rent payments and wedding gifts. Well, times have certainly changed, but onions remain key to so much of our cooking. We will start with a rich French onion soup made with yellow onions and served with homemade croutons and melted cheese. Next, I'll teach you how to glaze tiny red and white pearl onions with butter and balsamic vinegar, a perfect side dish. And finally, everyone loves to order onion rings in a restaurant, and today I'll show you how easy they are to make at home using a secret ingredient. Onions, cheese, stock, and bread. 4 simple ingredients that become a transcendent bowl of soup. In this classic French recipe, onions are slowly caramelized to bring out their natural sweetness and cooked in a rich beef stock. And when topped with a crouton and melted cheese, this simple soup is perfect if you're craving something warm and hearty. And it's good all times of year. To start with, we're using big yellow onions. And what I do is peel them and cut them in half this way, top down, and then slice them like this into thin pieces. It makes a very nice presentation in the soup, and it's a little bit unusual rather than slicing them that way. This is a very pretty presentation. So we'll need 2 pounds of yellow onions. And if the onions are large and glorious, such as these, you'll need probably 4 of these. My garden is full of great onions, and I love making onion soup. Now, 4 tablespoons of butter in a heavy pot like this with a wide bottom. This is an 8-quart enameled cast iron. I love cooking in something like this because they have to get really, really caramelized to get that dark, perfect onion soup. So add your onions and start them cooking down. This takes quite a long time, about an hour. It's that caramelization process, that cooking down of the onions, that really starts the soup tasting the way it should. As soon as they start to exude a little bit of their moisture, add 1 teaspoon of just granulated sugar. This helps speed up the caramelization process. This helps color the onions, giving it that sort of nutty brown color that is very desirable. I also add a little bit of olive oil just to keep the butter from burning. Stir, 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 cook, cook, cook. Now I do have a swap out of this so that we don't have to stand here for an hour. Now can you believe 2 pounds of onions have cooked down to this? It did take an hour, but they are exactly the way you want them. And now onto the hot onions in the hot pan, add 1 tablespoon of flour. This flour is the thickening agent for the final soup. It doesn't make it a real thick soup, you don't want that, but you want a little bit of thickness because we're adding about 3½ cups of stock. So cook down the flour. As soon as the flour is cooked, add a ½ cup of sherry. You could add cognac, you could add white wine. Sherry is traditional. And you'll see the adding of the liquid actually helps you scrape up that foam that is in the bottom of your pot. That is the brown bits. That's the color for your final soup. So you want all of that scraped up. And I'm using one of my favorite wooden spoons, the flat bottom spoon, because it really does allow you to scrape without hurting your pot. Okay, so this looks really good. And already there's a little creaminess because of that flour. And now add your stock. This is a thick, rich, homemade beef stock. It's very gelatinous. Can you see the lumps? That's just the natural gelatin in the cold stock. I keep quarts of stock like that in my freezer so that when the mood strikes me and I have the right onion, I will make my onion soup. Now add 2 teaspoons of thyme leaves. Fresh thyme leaves are best. Season with a large pinch of salt. You'll have to adjust that seasoning. So now bring this to a boil, reduce the heat to a simmer. If all your ingredients are added and everything looks like this, a nice dark brown color, just simmer for 30 minutes and your soup is done. Really, really important to use good quality ingredients. It will certainly make a difference in the flavor and the appearance of the soup. We have the soup ready to ladle. I love these. These are traditional onion soup bowls from France. You can use this kind or this. This has a handle. This has the two little ears. This is traditionally how it's served in a French restaurant or in France. A regular soup bowl will do if you don't have that. It's a little messy because those onions are long pieces, but divide this evenly. And actually, my favorite part of the soup is what's around the outside when it's finished. I like sitting there in the restaurant pulling that off, or at home just pulling off the excess melted cheese. And each soup bowl gets 3 ounces of a mixture of fontina, Gruyere, and Swiss cheese. If you want to serve a larger crowd or you want to put some of this soup in the freezer, I suggest making 2 times this recipe. You can wipe up a little bit. And now for the topping. This is French bread, a baguette cut on an angle. You'll need 2 of these. According to the recipe, you'll need them cut about 3/4 of an inch thick. The bread gets very soggy and kind of incorporates itself into the soup. So now, 4 ounces of Gruyere divided evenly. This is delicious, this topping, and the 3 kinds of cheeses really add a lot to the final dish. And some fontina. You could use all Gruyere if you like. That's pretty traditional. Or you could use Swiss. All fontina is a little strong. And here's the Swiss. And I hope some of it melts down the sides. Use it all. You've grated it, you deserve it. Preheat your broiler so that it's at its hottest. This is going to go right into the oven under the broiler, just until the cheese is melted and a beautiful, beautiful brown. Placing your bowls on a rimmed baking sheet will allow you to more easily transport the soup bowls to the oven. Also will prevent a lot of nasty cleanup afterward, because if this bubbles over, we'll have a mess. Watch it. You don't want it to burn, but you do want it to melt and get a beautiful crusty brown. They're very, very hot. Be very, very careful. And the way I like to serve these, straight out of the oven on a plate, so that you don't have to touch the little soup pot. Piece of delicious baguette. That is lunch, first course, or snack. It's delicious. Just the thing to make when you want to warm up on a cold day. I have a pot of boiling water on the stove, and I'm going to glaze some delicious pearl onions. Glazing is a technique that cooks vegetables in simmering water, and when the water evaporates, the sugars left behind produce a lovely glaze. Balsamic vinegar is added in this recipe to flavor and to make them look even more fabulous. Now to peel, just take a little bit of the root end off with the point of a sharp knife and cut an X in the root. It's important not to remove the whole root end, just the hairy part, because you don't want the onion to fall apart. You want it to keep its shape. So here we have a bowl of white onions with their peels still on. Put those into the rapidly boiling water for just about 60 seconds. This will loosen the skins, and start with the white onions if you're doing red and white. And I have a bowl of 10 ounces of red already prepared with the little X right in the bottom. That's important because it does allow you to just slip off the skin. And have a bowl of iced water with a strainer. This will chill them just enough to enable you to handle them well. Put Put them right in. This spider, this wonderful strainer on a stick, we call it a spider, is so handy for something like this. And it's also handy for putting these onions into the boiling water. Now, in the meantime, you can try to slip off the skins from the white onions. This should work very simply. See how easily they just peel right off? Just like magic. I love when things like this work well. And generally the outer skin and maybe the first layer of the onion should be removed for a pretty presentation. The stem end is also intact. That'll keep the onion's shape, that nice pointy tip of the onion. Do not cut that off, it's pretty. There, perfect. Okay, so these are ready to remove. This technique of partially cooking is called blanching. It's used extensively when you're making crudité. You can blanch your string beans, your broccoli, your peas, your snow peas, your sugar snap peas. And see how pretty the red onion is? Just perfect. Good, so now we're ready to glaze these onions. Put your blanched onions right into 3 tablespoons of melted butter and stir them around so that they get coated. I have the heat on high, and in 2 measuring cups we have a half a cup of dry white wine and 1 cup of water. Using the right amount of water is important. If you add too much, it can cause your vegetables to get too soft. If you don't use enough, your vegetables won't cook enough. So follow the recipe. Stir the onions around for a minute or 2, just to warm them. Make sure that they are getting ready to cook in the wine and water bath. So I'm going to add a half a cup of white wine and immediately add 1 cup of water. A little bit of salt and pepper. A good guideline is to add just enough liquid to almost cover the vegetables. Glazing like this is very nice with carrots, but I find that it also works extremely well for parsnips, for turnips, for fennel. All of those glaze extremely well. So the glazing is occurring. All the liquid has evaporated, and now add the flavor, which is 1/4 cup of good balsamic vinegar. Balsamic vinegar is an aged red wine vinegar, and as it ages and evaporates, it gets sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, and what you're left with is an amazingly pungent taste, but a sweet pungency. So here you have beautiful glazed onions. I'm going to add a little bit more salt and a little bit more pepper. When you turn up the heat, the water evaporates and the sugars left behind mix with the fat, the butter, to coat the vegetables with what's called the glaze. And these have glazed absolutely perfectly. Cook until the onions are tender. You can test it with the point of a knife. I've already done that. I know that these are tender, but they're not falling apart. They still have their shape. And that whole process takes approximately 15 minutes. And once complete, you can put these right into a serving dish. And what you have is a dish that's simple enough for a weeknight, yet special enough for a holiday dinner. When you bite into an onion ring, texture is just as important as taste. A good onion ring should have a light, crisp exterior with a soft, sweet onion inside. Many people are intimidated to make onion rings, but after today's lesson, you'll see just how easy and delicious they are when made at home. Now I'm using 2 beautiful yellow onions that look like this, and they've been peeled, and I'm slicing the onions themselves into 1/2-inch slices. These slices will then be broken up into onion rings. Be very careful, use an extremely sharp knife. A sharp knife, because it cuts straight through the fibers of an onion, actually cuts down on the tearing, the emission of gas from the onion. So just let these break into rings. It'll take a little coaxing, but that's an onion ring. All over the world, onions are a very ancient and popular flavoring for food, and they've been cultivated for about 5,000 years. And now we're using safflower oil. You can use canola oil. Best to use a vegetable oil with a high burning point. Okay, well that's enough rings for now. And we will make our batter. 1 cup of flour, all-purpose flour is good. 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper, a teaspoon of salt, and surprisingly, but important, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Whisk all these together. And now here's the secret ingredient, beer. 1 cup of a lager beer. The beer contains carbon dioxide, which actually adds to the crispiness of the fried onion. So now this is a little bit lumpy, don't worry about it. You want 2 tablespoons of iced water. It's a little similar to tempura batter. So here we have it. And alongside some all-purpose flour to first dip the onion ring in, then in the batter. And you just want 1 layer of onion rings in your batter at one time. I find it best to stir with a fork and drop with a finger. And they cook very quickly. They get golden brown very fast. Don't make a big batch of the batter. Just make it multiple times if you're making a lot of onion rings for a party or something. You want the action of the carbon dioxide from the fresh beer to be active. Keep the temperature around 375 degrees and use a deep fry thermometer that clips onto the side of your pot. It's a very useful tool in monitoring oil temperature. Flip this. Look at the great color. Oh my gosh. Now you don't want to overdo. Right onto a paper towel lined baking sheet. Check your oil temperature constantly. The best way to keep fried food from absorbing too much oil is to keep your oil at the ideal temperature. And for this, it is 375. So as quickly as you can, sprinkle with coarse salt while they're hot and arrange in a serving dish. I like to serve them on parchment like this. They look kind of pretty. Of course, for me, ketchup. Very important condiment for onion rings. A delightful little snack. One that we don't have very often, but when we do, we want them to look and taste and be just like these. These beer battered onion rings are great on their own or topped on a burger or steak. Try it, you'll enjoy. Another way to enjoy onions is to pickle them. This quick pickling method is great because it preserves the pink color of the red onions and it doesn't require the many steps of canning. So in a pan, just heat a tablespoon of mustard seeds and a tablespoon of coriander seeds. Just warm them just to get the flavors going. 3 cups of white balsamic vinegar. This is a little bit difficult to find, but a good grocer will probably have white balsamic vinegar. 3/4 cup of water, 6 tablespoons of sugar, and 6 tablespoons of salt. This is your pickling brine. Just heat that up a little bit just to dissolve the sugar and the salt. And now the onions are just cut in half and then slice like this, similar to the method I used for the onion soup. A nice way to cut onions. It's a little bit different and tests your knife skills. Use a very, very sharp knife. Essential for cutting onions. Now all of these onions, 2 red onions and 2 white onions, will be packed in a canning jar. Red onions are milder than yellow onions, as are white onions, much, much milder. These are Vidalia onions. And Vidalia onions were discovered by some farmers in Georgia. They discovered an onion with a really sweet and delicious flavor, and now it is a giant crop in Georgia. So pack the onions in a pickling jar, mixing white with red. I like these jars with the clamp tops and the rubber rings. They are very, very effective and pretty. You could use all one kind of onion for this. It seems like everybody's into pickling these days. Pickled food is very good for you. And the fermentation that goes on in pickling adds some very good features to vegetables. It's very good for your digestive system. And when you're pickling, it's very important that you use kosher salt or pickling salt. It has no iodine, no added minerals or anti-caking agents that many other salts have. So be careful about your choice of salt when pickling. So look how pretty this is. This is great. Add bay leaves to your jar. You can just stick them down the sides. And 3 sprigs of thyme. These 2 can be pushed down into the onions. They're going to decrease in volume as they pickle, so don't worry about having too many onions in a jar. You can press them down even further with a rubber spatula. I learned the art of pickling at my mother's side. She did so many different kinds of pickles, and I still like to make pickles. We have our warmed spices, coriander and mustard, and our brine is almost ready. So just check to see that all the sugar and salt is dissolved. I think we can now pour the pickling liquid into a heat-proof measuring cup. This will make it easier to pour into the jar. I don't trust pouring from a pot into that mouth of the jar. And I must tell you, it smells very good. That balsamic vinegar has a unique aroma. So now this gets poured right into your onions. Cover all the solids by about 1/2 inch. And then this can be covered and kept in the refrigerator for up to a week or 10 days. This is what happens after a week. Do you see the difference between this and this? All of the onions have taken on the pinkness of the red onion. They are crispy, tasty, mellow, and a wonderful, wonderful accompaniment to grilled fish, chicken. They're wonderful on hamburgers. Oh my gosh, so good. And they don't leave your breath smelling oniony. So try pickling some onions. It's a great way to complement the sweet flavors of onions. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Cooking School. Combine 2 caramelized Vidalia onions with 1 cup of sour cream, 2 ounces of cream cheese, and 1½ teaspoons of white wine vinegar. Finely chop 1/4 cup chives and add those to the bowl. Season with coarse salt and pepper and stir to combine. Chill until thickened, about 1 hour. Then serve with crudité or chips and enjoy.